Clara had always been the invisible one, the forgotten daughter. But when her father slapped her in front of a crowded airport for refusing to carry her sister's bags, something inside her broke. The humiliation, the betrayal, it all hit like a tidal wave. Without a word, she turned her back on her family, boarding a flight to Paris instead of Dubai. She was done being the family's doormat. This was her moment to rise, and no one, not even her family, would stop her. Clara was about to change everything, for good. Clara stepped off the plane with a heavy heart and a heavier bag. At 41, she had grown used to the feeling of exhaustion that accompanied every family gathering, every trip, every obligation. Her mind, weary from a back-to-back deadline at work, felt foggy from the lack of sleep she'd managed during the overnight flight from New York to Dubai. The moment she walked through the terminal, the cacophony of voices, the blaring announcements, and the rushing crowds made her feel even more isolated, as if she were invisible in the midst of all the chaos. The trip had been her parents' idea, a family reset after Eliza's graduation. Clara knew it wasn't about her at all, but about the princess of the family, Eliza, the 21-year-old who could do no wrong, the daughter who was always the centre of attention. Clara had come along, despite her exhaustion, because she didn't want to be the one who ruined everything. After all, her role was clear: be the dependable one, the quiet one, the one who made sure everything went smoothly for Eliza. Her mum's voice echoed across the terminal. "Clara, grab Eliza's bags, she's struggling with them." Clara blinked and turned to see her mother, standing at the baggage claim, eyes expectantly on her. Eliza, in all her glory, was standing next to a towering stack of Louis Vuitton luggage, struggling to look anything but flawless. Clara had only one bag, light enough to carry without breaking a sweat. But Eliza's bags, they could have been mistaken for a small family of suitcases. Clara's body tightened in protest. She had already carried her own bag through the airport, and to her that was enough. "Mum, I've got my own things to handle. She's an adult. She can manage her own bags." But her mother wasn't listening. She repeated her request, but Clara refused. "I'm not carrying her bags, Mum. She's perfectly capable of handling them on her own." Eliza rolled her eyes, the sound of her exaggerated sigh piercing Clara's resolve. "Oh, here we go again. Miss Independent with her one sad carry-on," Eliza muttered under her breath, barely glancing at Clara as she shoved the handle of one of her oversized trunks into Clara's hand. Clara froze. It wasn't just the bags. It wasn't just the fact that Eliza thought nothing of handing over her heavy load, expecting Clara to pick it up. It was the constant, relentless pattern of disregard for Clara's needs, her feelings. The years of being overlooked, of being expected to serve, to be the helper. She had tolerated it for years, but something inside her snapped. "No," Clara said, her voice quieter than she intended, but firm. "I'm not your maid, Eliza." Her words were met with silence. Eliza stared at her in surprise, a hint of annoyance crossing her features. Their mother, ever the peacemaker, rushed to intervene. "Clara, don't start. We're here for family. Let's not make a scene." But Clara's heart was pounding, her body shaking from a mix of anger and hurt. Her mother's words hit her like a slap, as if her needs, her desires were never a part of the equation. For a moment she considered just walking away, leaving her family behind, but she remained rooted in place, her eyes locked on her father, who had been talking with the airline staff. "Clara!" Her father's voice boomed, a sharp edge to his tone. He turned to face her, his face already twisted in frustration. "I said, grab her bags." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had never liked the way her father spoke to her, never understood why he could never just let her be. She felt her pulse quicken, and in that moment her decision was made. "No," Clara repeated, louder this time, her voice tinged with finality. "This time I won't do it. She can carry her own bags. She's an adult. I'm not your servant." Her father's face contorted in anger. Before she could say another word, he stormed up to her, the force of his hand meeting her cheek in one swift motion. The slap rang through the air, a crack that seemed to echo in the noise of the airport. Clara staggered back, her hand instinctively going to her face. The sting was not just from the slap, but from the shock of being humiliated in front of so many strangers, of being reduced to nothing more than an object of scorn in her own family. The world around her slowed, the voices, the footsteps, the clinking of luggage, everything faded. She could hear a woman behind her gasp. A security guard, eyes wide, stopped what he was doing and glanced toward her, but none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered in that moment was the searing pain on her cheek, the fiery humiliation that burned deeper than the physical sting. For a long moment, Clara stood frozen. She could feel the eyes of the world on her, but she couldn't look at her parents. She couldn't face the betrayal. And then something inside her shifted. Something broke free. The slap felt like a thunderclap. Clara staggered back, her hand instinctively reaching up to her cheek. The sting, the shock, the overwhelming rush of humiliation, it was too much to process all at once. She couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. All she could hear was the ringing in her ears, the muffled gasps from the onlookers. The crowd around her had fallen into an eerie silence. It was as if the world had stopped moving, and Clara was frozen in time. She could feel the eyes of strangers on her, their judgmental stares penetrating her skin. Her father stood just a few feet away, his face flushed with anger, but there was no regret in his eyes, only contempt. Her mother stood behind him, looking uncomfortable but not intervening. Eliza was off to the side, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Clara's mind raced, her thoughts jumbled. She had never imagined this, never in her worst nightmares had she expected her own father to slap her in front of a crowd, to humiliate her in such a public, painful way. "Get over yourself," her father spat, his voice sharp, cutting through the silence. "You're not special, Clara. You're just being dramatic." The words pierced through her like daggers. All her life, she had been the one to hold it together, the one to put up with everything for the sake of the family. But in that moment, her father's words confirmed everything she had feared. To them, she was nothing, just someone who had to play the part, who had to live in the shadow of her younger, favoured sister. She had spent years being the one to do the heavy lifting, to make the sacrifices, and yet this is how they saw her. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, her hands trembling. But deep within her, something was shifting. Something inside her snapped. She took a deep breath, her chest tightening, but her resolve growing stronger. Without a word, she turned away from them. She didn't look back, didn't pause to see the reactions of her family. The air around her seemed to grow colder, and for the first time in her life, she felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. She wasn't going to do this anymore. She wasn't going to stay in a family where she had no value, where she was seen as nothing but a burden. She walked towards the airline counter, her footsteps steady and firm, each step taking her further away from the past, from the people who had never truly seen her. The ticketing agent greeted her, her face friendly but professional. Clara stood there for a moment, gathering her thoughts, her heart still racing. She could feel the weight of her decision, the finality of it, but she was resolute. "I need to upgrade to business class," Clara said, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the turmoil inside her. The agent looked at her for a moment, probably noticing the red mark on Clara's cheek, but she didn't ask any questions. Instead, she simply nodded and began typing away at her computer. Clara glanced back towards the group, her mother now talking to a security guard, Eliza looking at her phone, clearly unfazed by the scene she had just witnessed. It was as if nothing had happened. But Clara knew that something had changed. Something inside her had finally broken free, and she wasn't going to let herself be a part of this family's toxic dynamic anymore. When the agent handed her the new boarding pass, Clara took it with a sense of finality, a sense of power she hadn't felt in years. A single, quiet text was all it took to sever the last ties that had bound her to that family. She didn't need to explain. She didn't need to justify her actions. She was done. "Enjoy Dubai. I'm not going." She sent the text and turned off her phone, slipping it back into her bag. She didn't want to hear from them anymore. Not now. Not ever. As she made her way to the business class gate, Clara felt a rush of freedom flooding over her. This wasn't a victory, not yet. But it was the first step toward reclaiming her life, toward finding herself, her worth, outside of her family's suffocating expectations. She boarded the plane. The contrast between the cramped economy section and the luxurious business class, a stark reminder of what she was leaving behind and what she was about to gain. She sank into the plush seat, letting the comfort of the surroundings wash over her. The flight attendant offered her a glass of champagne, and for the first time in a long time, Clara allowed herself to smile. Not because she was happy about the circumstances, but because she was finally in control of her own life. The plane began to taxi down the runway, and Clara looked out of the window, watching as the airport grew smaller and smaller. As the wheels lifted off the ground, so did the weight on her shoulders. She was no longer bound by her family's expectations. She was free. She wasn't going to Dubai, she was going to Paris. Clara stepped out of the taxi in front of a small boutique hotel nestled on a quiet street in Paris. The air was crisp, carrying with it the faint scent of fresh rain and the promise of a new beginning. It was nothing like the chaos of the airport, nothing like the suffocating presence of her family. She stood still for a moment, taking in the silence, the tranquility of a city that was hers to explore without anyone telling her what to do or who to be. She checked into the hotel and made her way up to her room, a cosy, understated space with exposed brick walls, a small balcony that overlooked the street, and a bed that looked like it could swallow her whole. As soon as she entered, Clara sank onto the bed, her body immediately giving in to the exhaustion that had been weighing on her for days. She closed her eyes, taking in a deep breath as she tried to let the weight of the past few days slip away. It felt strange, this feeling of freedom. She had been so used to the noise, the expectations, the constant tension of living up to her family's standards, that this calmness, this space, almost felt like a luxury she didn't deserve. But for the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to just be. She wasn't someone's daughter, someone's servant, someone's second choice. She was Clara, and for the first time, she didn't have to be anything else. Clara sat up, glancing around the room. It was modest, but in a way, it was exactly what she needed. No distractions, no expectations, no one to answer to. Just her and the city, two strangers on the brink of something new. But even in the quiet of her room, the echo of her family's voices lingered. She could almost hear her mother's nagging, her father's disappointed sighs, the way Eliza always found a way to make everything about her. Clara had spent so many years trying to fit into a mould that was never made for her. She had tried to be what they wanted her to be, to fulfill their expectations, but it was never enough. She was always the one who had to make sacrifices, who had to step aside. And for what? To be told she wasn't good enough? That's when it hit her. This was her life now. There was no turning back, no going back to that broken family dynamic where she was nothing but a supporting player in everyone else's story. She was done. Done trying to prove herself, done trying to earn their love and approval. If they didn't see her worth, then that was their loss, not hers. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt something shift inside her. A quiet determination, a promise to herself that she would no longer be the one to carry the weight of her family's dysfunction. She wasn't just running away from them, she was running towards something better, something more. Paris had always been her dream. The city of lights, the city of freedom. And now, here she was, standing on the edge of a new chapter. She could feel the potential of this moment, the possibility of what she could become now that she was no longer tied to the past. Clara stepped out onto the small balcony, the cool air brushing against her skin. She gazed out at the street below, watching as people walked by, lost in their own lives, free to make their own choices. She envied them, and yet she also felt a deep sense of kinship. For the first time, she was one of them. She was free. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her back into the reality she had been trying to escape. It was a message from her mother, a simple one. "We're worried about you, Clara. Why didn't you come with us? Why are you doing this?" Clara stared at the screen for a long moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She thought about responding, thought about explaining herself, but then she stopped. She didn't owe them anything. She had nothing left to prove. Instead, she turned off her phone and slipped it into her bag, determined not to let them drag her back into the past. She stood there for a few more minutes, letting the peace of the moment settle over her. Paris was everything she had dreamed of, and more. But more than that, it was the place where she would finally begin to live her life on her own terms. No more living in the shadow of her family's expectations. No more pretending to be something she wasn't. For the first time in years, Clara felt something deep inside her stir. It wasn't just relief, it was something stronger. It was the feeling of hope. Hope for herself, hope for the future, hope for the person she was about to become. She wasn't sure where this journey would take her, but she knew one thing for sure: she was going to do it for herself, and that was enough. Clara had only been in Paris for a few days, but already the city was working its magic. The air felt different here, lighter, freer. As she walked through the cobblestone streets, her mind seemed to clear, and with every step she felt herself shedding the weight of the past. She no longer had to worry about expectations, about pleasing anyone. For the first time in years, she was doing everything for herself. The hotel room she had rented, though small, became her sanctuary. It was a space she could truly call her own, one where she could begin to figure out what she wanted from life, beyond the roles that had been assigned to her in her family. Clara knew this was her opportunity to reinvent herself. But then, just as she was starting to settle into her new life, something unexpected happened. Clara had been at a small cafe near her hotel when she saw a message pop up on her phone. It was from an email address she didn't recognize. At first she hesitated, wondering if it was spam, but then the subject line caught her eye. Job interview, fashion designer position. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She opened the email, her eyes scanning the words quickly. It was an invitation to interview for a position at one of Paris's most prestigious fashion houses, Maison de Lune. The company was known for its innovative designs, its high-profile clientele, and its ability to spot emerging talent. Clara had always dreamed of working in the fashion industry, but her family had never taken her ambitions seriously. They had never understood her passion, especially since she had always been expected to follow a more practical career path. Now, here she was, thousands of miles away from the life that had tried to hold her back, and the opportunity of a lifetime was staring her in the face. Clara couldn't believe it. She was actually being offered a chance to prove herself in the very industry she'd always dreamed of joining. This was more than just a job offer. It was a sign that she was on the right path, that leaving everything behind was the best decision she had ever made. The interview was scheduled for the following week, and Clara immediately began preparing. She pored over her portfolio, making sure everything was perfect. She had spent years designing in secret, submitting sketches to small labels under a pen name, and now it was time for the world to see her work. She felt a mix of excitement and nerves, but there was a quiet confidence within her as well. This was her time. When the day of the interview arrived, Clara stood in front of the mirror in her hotel room, adjusting her navy dress. Her natural curls were pulled back into a neat ponytail, and she applied just a hint of makeup to complete the look. She didn't want to look like anyone else. She wanted to look like herself, confident and ready to step into her future. As she entered the interview room, she was met by a panel of executives, including Brigitte, the head designer at Maison de Lune. Clara's heart raced as she presented her portfolio, describing her designs and the inspiration behind each piece. Brigitte listened intently, her expression unreadable, but Clara could tell she was impressed. There was a certain energy in the room, a feeling of possibility that Clara hadn't felt in years. When it was over, Clara stepped out of the room, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't know what to expect. What if she wasn't good enough? What if they didn't think she had what it took to succeed in such a prestigious company? But just as she was about to head back to her hotel, her phone rang. It was the company's HR department. Clara took a deep breath and answered. "Miss Rayner, I'm pleased to inform you that you've been selected for the position. Congratulations." Clara could hardly believe her ears. She had done it. She had secured the job of her dreams. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of excitement. Clara dove headfirst into her new role at Maison de Lune, working alongside some of the best designers in the world. Every day was a new challenge, a new opportunity to prove herself. She was no longer just Clara, the quiet daughter from a family that had never appreciated her. She was Clara, the designer, the creative force that had come to Paris to make a name for herself. For the first time in her life, Clara felt truly seen. Her work was being celebrated, her ideas were being valued, and she was being treated like the professional she had always known she could be. But beyond the professional success, Clara realized something even more important. She had finally found the freedom she had been searching for, the freedom to be herself without apology, without anyone telling her who she should be. Her family had never understood her. They had never understood that her worth wasn't tied to their expectations. But here in Paris, Clara finally understood her own worth. She was more than just a daughter, more than just someone who lived in the shadow of others. She was a woman on her own path, creating her own future, and for the first time in a long time, Clara felt at peace. The days that followed Clara's new beginning in Paris were a blur of excitement and discovery. Her days were filled with fittings, design meetings, and late nights spent sketching her next collection. The work was exhilarating, and for the first time in years, Clara felt alive with purpose. But as much as she tried to immerse herself in her new life, her family's presence was never far from her mind. It started with the phone calls. The first came a few days after her arrival in Paris. Clara had just finished a long meeting at the fashion house and was heading back to her apartment when her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. She hesitated for a moment before opening it. "Clara, please, we need to talk. I don't understand why you did this. Your father is beside himself. What happened to us being a family?" Clara stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She had expected this, but it still felt like a gut punch. Her mother's words were filled with a mix of confusion, hurt, and frustration. Clara couldn't help but wonder how they could expect her to come back after everything that had happened. After the slap, after the years of being overlooked and undervalued. Her decision was final, and she wasn't going to apologize for it. She quickly typed a response. "I'm fine, Mom. I'm where I need to be. Please respect my decision." She set the phone down, but just as she did, it buzzed again. Another message, this time from Eliza. "You think you're better than us now, don't you? You're so selfish. You'll regret this. We're all just fine here, but you won't be. Wait until you realize how alone you really are." Clara's fingers clenched around the phone, her pulse quickening as she read the words. Eliza had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in their parents' eyes. Now, she was using her privilege as a weapon, trying to make Clara feel small, trying to make her second-guess her decision. But Clara wasn't the same person she had been back home. She wasn't going to be manipulated or guilted into returning. With a deep breath, Clara put the phone away. She didn't want to let their words affect her. She had worked too hard to get to this point, and she wasn't going to let them drag her back into the past. The next few days were filled with more messages, more attempts at reaching her. Her mother called multiple times, but Clara let each one go to voicemail. Eliza sent text after text, some angry, some pleading, all trying to break her resolve. Clara blocked their numbers, but she couldn't escape the feelings their words stirred in her. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, Clara sat alone in her apartment, sipping a glass of wine. The silence of the apartment felt comforting, but at the same time she could feel the weight of her family's expectations pressing in on her. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to clear her mind. The thought of them, of their judgment, their criticisms, had become a constant presence in her life, even from miles away. Just then she received another message. This time it wasn't from her family. It was from her colleague at Maison de Lune, a young designer named Lucy, who had quickly become a close friend. Lucy had invited Clara to a special event, an exclusive showcase for some of the company's top clients and industry figures. The event was meant to celebrate the launch of a new collection, and Lucy insisted that Clara attend. It was an opportunity for Clara to network, to see how her work was being received by the industry's elite. Clara felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This was her chance to prove herself even more, to show that she belonged in the world she had always dreamed of. She was no longer the quiet, overlooked daughter from a family that didn't appreciate her. She was a professional, a designer, someone whose talent could not be ignored. The night of the event arrived, and Clara dressed in a sleek, simple black dress that made her feel powerful. She kept her hair natural, her curls framing her face, and applied a bold red lipstick. As she stepped into the venue, the buzz of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the flash of cameras surrounded her. She felt a sense of awe and disbelief. This was her world now, the world she had fought so hard to be a part of. The event was everything Clara had hoped for, and more. She met influential figures, exchanged ideas with fellow designers, and saw her work being admired by some of the top people in the fashion industry. For the first time, she felt like she belonged. She wasn't an afterthought or a supporting character in someone else's story. She was the one creating the story, and the world was finally taking notice. Later in the evening, as Clara stood near the bar, Lucy approached her, a proud smile on her face. "You did it," Lucy said. "You belong here, Clara. You've proven it tonight." Clara smiled back, feeling a surge of pride. She was no longer the girl who had been pushed aside. She had carved her own path, and she was making her mark. As she stood there, surrounded by the glittering world she had always dreamed of, Clara realized something profound. She wasn't just successful because of the job or the praise she was receiving. She was successful because she had found her strength. She had walked away from everything she had known, everything that had held her back, and had embraced her own journey. The change in her wasn't just about the work she was doing, it was about who she had become. The timid, uncertain girl who had been afraid of disappointing her family was gone. In her place stood a confident, independent woman ready to take on the world. The days after the showcase had been a blur of excitement and validation. Clara had finally felt the weight of her decision to leave her family behind lift off her shoulders. Every day in Paris brought new opportunities, new faces, and more confirmation that she had made the right choice. Yet, as much as she tried to focus on the future, the past kept calling her back, echoing in the messages from her family. Clara had hoped the phone calls would stop, that her family would eventually understand, but that wasn't the case. One afternoon, while working on a new design in her apartment, she received another email, this time from her mother. "Clara, we're coming to Paris next week. We've booked tickets. We want to see you. Please don't shut us out. We're a family and we miss you." Clara froze. The words hit her like a ton of bricks. She had known this day would come, but now that it was here, she felt a wave of panic flood over her. She wasn't ready to see them. She wasn't ready to face her father, not after what had happened at the airport. And Eliza? The sister who had always taken everything for granted, the one who had never once considered how Clara felt. She wasn't ready to face her either. The idea of seeing them again, of reliving the years of feeling like a second-class citizen in her own family, filled Clara with a deep sense of dread. Her mother's words were pleading, desperate, but Clara knew that nothing had changed. They hadn't apologized for the way they had treated her, and they weren't suddenly going to respect her boundaries now. They saw her as the one who was supposed to hold everything together for them, to cater to their needs while sacrificing her own. Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. The thought of being in their presence, feeling their judgment, their disappointment, was too much. It was as though all the memories of the years she had spent trying to live up to their impossible expectations were rushing back to her, overwhelming her in an instant. Her thoughts drifted back to the countless times she had been compared to Eliza. How her mother had always praised Eliza for her accomplishments, her beauty, her charm, while Clara was left to silently endure. How her father had never once looked at her with pride, always keeping his focus on Eliza. Even now, after everything she had accomplished on her own, they still saw her as the one who was supposed to fit into their mould, to be the one who quietly supported Eliza's success without ever getting a moment to shine. But Clara wasn't that person anymore. She wasn't the one who would just sit back and take it. She had made a choice to walk away from a family that had never valued her, and she wasn't going to go back to the role they had always assigned her. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. She didn't want to see them. She didn't want to go back to the past. She had finally found her place in Paris, a place where she was respected for who she was and what she had accomplished. The idea of stepping back into the old dynamic, where she was expected to be everything for everyone except herself, was suffocating. Clara stared at the email, her finger hovering over the reply button. She thought about all the things she could say, how she wasn't ready to see them, how she wasn't the same person anymore. But in the end, she decided that no explanation was needed. She didn't owe them anything. Her decision had already been made, and there was nothing they could do to change that. Instead, Clara closed her laptop and stood up, walking over to the window of her apartment. She looked out at the bustling streets below, the city of Paris that had given her the freedom she had longed for. It was a far cry from the city of judgment and disappointment she had left behind. Paris had become her refuge, her place to rebuild, and she wasn't about to let anything or anyone take that from her. She grabbed her coat and headed out the door, determined to continue the life she had started for herself. As she walked through the streets of Paris, the crisp air filling her lungs, Clara realized that she was no longer the girl who had been overlooked and underestimated by her family. She was a woman who had found her own path, and nothing, not even the weight of her past, could stop her now. The phone buzzed in her pocket again, another message from her mother. "Clara, we're coming. We need to talk. Please don't shut us out." Clara took a deep breath and silenced the phone, tucking it away. She wasn't going to let them control her anymore. She had worked too hard to get to this point, and she was done being the person who was always trying to fix everyone else's problems while neglecting her own. She wasn't going to meet them in Paris. She wasn't going to let their expectations, their guilt, their manipulation pull her back into a life she had left behind. She had made her choice, and for the first time in her life, Clara felt at peace with it. The future was hers, and it was up to her to decide what that future looked like. A few weeks after her decision to cut ties with her family, Clara received a message that left her momentarily frozen. It was from Eliza. "Hey Clara, I hope you're doing well. I know things have been a bit tense between us, but I need your help. I'm looking for an internship for my program, and I heard there might be an opportunity at Maison de Lune. Could you help me get my foot in the door? I'm really trying to make it on my own. I know we don't always get along, but I really need this. Please think about it." Clara stared at the message, her fingers hovering over her phone. Eliza's words were coated with that familiar air of entitlement, asking for a favour, but with a veneer of pleading, as if Clara owed her something. Clara had already given up on the idea of ever being close with Eliza again, but there was something else beneath the surface of the message that tugged at her. Eliza was still asking for Clara's help, still trying to use her as a stepping stone, just like always. Clara had spent years being pushed aside for Eliza's sake. All those times her parents had excused Eliza's behaviour, all the times they had praised her for things that Clara had done as well. All while Clara stood silently in the background. Now, Eliza had the audacity to ask for her help. The nerve. But Clara wasn't the same woman she had been when she left home. She wasn't the girl who had been manipulated and gaslighted into thinking she didn't deserve more. Clara had something to prove, not just to her family, but to herself. She wasn't going to be the one to keep letting them take advantage of her. She had come too far, and this was her moment to stand firm. Clara thought about it for a while. A part of her wanted to ignore the message and let Eliza figure it out on her own. But something about it gnawed at her. She couldn't just let Eliza waltz into the world she had fought so hard to create for herself. And so Clara made a decision. She would help Eliza, but she would do it on her terms. Clara wasn't about to give Eliza an easy ride. She wanted to prove to her family that Eliza wasn't the perfect golden child they believed her to be. Clara was going to show them just how unworthy Eliza was of the privileges they handed her on a silver platter. With cold precision, Clara sat down and wrote an email to her superior at Maison de Lune. She attached Eliza's resume, the one she had sent with her request for help, but Clara didn't stop there. She included a detailed account of the person Eliza had been. A spoiled, entitled girl who had never once earned anything on her own. Clara's tone remained professional, but there was a certain finality to her words that only someone who had been deeply hurt could convey. I'm sending you the resume of my sister Eliza. While she may appear like a promising candidate, I wanted to share some context that you might find useful. Eliza has always relied on others to get ahead, never taking responsibility for her actions or her mistakes. She has a history of manipulating situations to her advantage, and while she may be charming, she lacks the drive and humility that this industry demands. Please take this information into consideration when reviewing her application. Clara paused after hitting send, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't done this for revenge, not entirely. She had done it because Eliza needed to learn a lesson. Clara had worked for every opportunity she had earned, every accomplishment she had achieved. She wasn't going to let her sister coast through life simply because of her looks and charm. Clara wanted to show her family, especially her parents, that their blind favoritism had never been justified. And Eliza? She needed to face the consequences of her actions. Days passed, and Clara didn't think much about the email. She continued to focus on her work, on the life she had carved out for herself in Paris. She knew there was no going back to the person she had been, and she wasn't going to allow anyone to drag her back into the suffocating environment she had left behind. Then one day, Clara received a call from her boss. The interview with Eliza had taken place, and it had gone disastrously. Eliza, thinking she could simply charm her way through, had struggled to answer the basic questions about her qualifications and work ethic. The interviewers had been unimpressed, to say the least. Clara's boss, trying to keep things professional, had said little, but Clara could tell by the tone of her voice that Eliza's chances were gone. Later that evening, Clara received a message from Eliza, her tone completely different than before. I know you did something to mess up my interview. I didn't get the internship, and I know it's because of you. I don't understand why you're doing this. I thought we were family. How could you treat me like this? Clara stared at the message, but there was no anger, no regret in her heart. Instead, there was a sense of satisfaction, because for the first time she had done something for herself, and it felt good. She wasn't going to let Eliza walk over her anymore. Clara didn't reply immediately. Instead, she simply deleted the message and turned off her phone. She had made her point. Eliza had finally learned the lesson Clara had been trying to teach her all these years. And Clara? She was finally free. Clara could feel the weight of her actions settling into place. She had done something she'd been too afraid to do for years. She had taken control. Her family had always expected her to be the silent one, the one who swallowed her anger and played her part, but not anymore. She had made her mark on Paris, and now she was making sure that her sister, Eliza, would understand the consequences of taking Clara's kindness for granted. Days passed, and Eliza's message still lingered in Clara's mind. Eliza had no idea what had truly happened behind the scenes. She still thought that she could walk into the world Clara had worked so hard to create and simply waltz her way into success. But Clara had made sure that wouldn't happen. She had been deliberate, careful, and most importantly, silent. Eliza wouldn't understand what had happened, but Clara didn't need her to. The day after the interview, Clara's phone buzzed with another message from her mother, this time with an unmistakable sense of urgency. "Clara, I'm hearing some things about Eliza's interview. She didn't get the internship? Why would they turn her down? She's worked so hard, and she's so talented." Clara could feel the sharp pang of guilt, but she pushed it aside. It wasn't her fault that Eliza hadn't done the work. It wasn't her fault that Eliza thought she could coast through life using charm and a pretty face. Clara had worked too hard to get where she was, and she wasn't about to let her family's endless favoritism go unchecked. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of how to respond. It would have been easy to deny everything and let her mother continue to believe in her version of events. But Clara wasn't that person anymore. She couldn't continue to be the one who kept her family's secrets, who shielded them from the truth. They didn't deserve that from her anymore. Instead, Clara replied with a simple message. "Maybe it's time Eliza learns that the world doesn't just hand you everything because of who you are. She needs to take responsibility for her own actions." The words felt empowering, and Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. This wasn't just about Eliza. It was about Clara too. It was about reclaiming her power, about setting boundaries that no one had ever respected before. It was about drawing a line in the sand and saying, "This is where I stand." Her mother's response came swiftly. "I don't understand, Clara. This isn't like you. You've always been the one to take care of everyone. Why can't you help her now?" Clara's lips curled into a faint smile as she read the message. She had been the one to take care of everyone, but not anymore. She had given enough of herself to people who never appreciated it, to people who thought they could walk all over her. Now she was taking care of herself. It was time for Eliza, for all of them, to learn that lesson. As the days passed, Clara's thoughts drifted back to Eliza's interview. She had orchestrated everything so that Eliza would fail, not out of malice, but out of necessity. She had been too kind for too long. Eliza needed to feel the sting of disappointment, the weight of failure, because she had never experienced it before. Clara had wanted her sister to face the truth. The world doesn't owe you anything, and your name or appearance won't carry you forever. Clara found herself smiling more often as she went about her day-to-day activities, knowing that she had done the right thing. The satisfaction came not from revenge, but from the realization that she had taken control of her own story. She no longer had to live in the shadow of her sister, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in their parents' eyes. Clara had built her own life, her own identity, and it was hers alone. Eliza had no idea what had happened, and Clara didn't care to tell her. The truth was, Clara didn't need to say anything. Her actions had already spoken louder than words. When Eliza found out the truth, that she had failed because of her own lack of effort, because of her entitlement, she would have to face it on her own. Clara had already moved on, already secured her place in the world, and there was no going back. One evening, Clara received a message from Eliza. It was a simple one. "I don't know what happened. I don't know why I didn't get the internship, but I'm so angry, Clara. You always think you're better than me, don't you?" Clara read the message without responding immediately. Her sister's words were as predictable as ever, but this time Clara felt no guilt, no responsibility. She wasn't the one who had let Eliza down. It was Eliza who had failed to take responsibility for her actions, who had failed to realize that the world would not bend to her will. Clara's finger hovered over her phone, and for a brief moment she considered responding. She thought about telling Eliza everything, the truth, the behind-the-scenes decisions, the reasoning behind Clara's actions. But then she stopped. Eliza didn't need the truth. Clara didn't owe her any explanation. Instead, Clara simply put the phone down, closed her eyes, and let out a slow, steady breath. She was done. Done with the games, done with the guilt, and done with the past. She had found her way, and she wasn't about to let anyone pull her back into the life she had left behind. Clara stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the delicate fabric of her dress, a quiet sense of pride swelling inside her. It had been months since she had left behind her family, since she had walked away from the life they had tried to force on her. Now, in the heart of Paris, she was about to showcase her first collection, her vision, her talent, her hard work on one of the most prestigious runways in the fashion world. It was a moment that symbolized everything she had fought for, everything she had overcome. The night of the showcase had finally arrived, and Clara could hardly contain her excitement. The venue was stunning. Sleek white walls, modern fixtures, and the soft glow of the lights illuminating the space. As she looked around the venue, she saw the sea of guests arriving, industry elites, designers, influencers, and journalists. But among the crowd, she knew there would be one group she had invited for a very specific reason, her family. The decision to invite them had not been an easy one. Clara had spent years pushing them away, but something inside her wanted to show them the woman she had become, the success they had failed to see when she was simply their daughter. She wanted them to realize how wrong they had been to dismiss her, to overlook her talent and potential for so long. So she had extended the invitation, not to seek their approval, but to finally make them see the truth. Her phone buzzed as a message from her mother popped up. "We're here, Clara. We're so proud of you." It was simple, but Clara could feel the weight of it. Her mother's words, though proud, seemed like they came with an underlying guilt. They had never truly appreciated her before, but now they were here, watching as she took the spotlight. Clara couldn't help but feel a slight sense of satisfaction. This was her moment, not theirs. As the first models took their places on the runway, Clara couldn't help but feel the electricity in the room. The designs she had poured her soul into were now being presented to the world. Her collection was bold, full of sharp lines, vibrant colours and daring contrasts. It was everything Clara had ever wanted to create, a perfect blend of elegance and power, of strength and vulnerability. The show began, and Clara stood at the back, watching as the models walked the runway. Each piece was a reflection of her journey, every fabric, every stitch, every design telling a story. The crowd was mesmerized, the flashes of cameras capturing the moment as Clara's name began to circulate among the industry's elite. She had done it. She had made it. But then her gaze shifted to her family sitting in the front row. Her mother, father, and Eliza were there, their eyes wide with a mix of awe and disbelief. Clara could see the shift in their expressions as they took in the scale of her success, the way they began to realize the enormity of what she had accomplished. For years, they had never believed in her, never understood her passion, but now they couldn't ignore it. Her mother caught her eye for a brief moment, and Clara saw the unspoken regret in her gaze. It was the same look she had given her all those years ago, when Clara had quietly tried to prove herself and had always been overlooked. But now there was no denying her worth. Clara had risen far beyond what anyone had ever expected of her. As the final model walked the runway, Clara felt a rush of emotion. This was her moment, her chance to show the world and her family what she was capable of. She had proven them wrong. She had proven herself. After the show, Clara stood near the bar, surrounded by guests congratulating her on the success of the evening. She received compliments from industry heavyweights, designers, and critics who admired her work. For the first time, Clara felt like she was finally being seen, not as the overlooked daughter, not as someone's second choice, but as the accomplished designer she had always known she could be. But then her parents approached, their faces a mixture of pride and hesitation. Clara's mother stepped forward, her voice shaky but sincere. "Clara, we had no idea. We always thought you were just playing around with your designs, but tonight we see what you've truly accomplished. We're so proud of you." Clara looked at her mother, and for a moment she considered saying something, anything, to break the tension. But as her father stood beside her, looking at the floor, Clara realized that no words could undo the years of neglect and misunderstanding. Their pride now felt hollow, a poor substitute for the years of silence and judgment. "Thank you," Clara said simply. Her voice was steady, but she didn't feel the need to say more. Her work had already spoken for her. It was no longer about their approval, it was about her. Eliza, standing to the side, looked at Clara with an expression Clara couldn't quite place, perhaps a mix of jealousy and awe. She didn't speak, but Clara could feel her gaze. Eliza had always been the one who had taken everything for granted, the one who never had to work as hard as Clara to get attention. But now Eliza was seeing Clara in a new light, a light that she could no longer overshadow. As the evening continued, Clara found herself standing outside the venue, looking up at the Paris skyline. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter that night. She had done it. She had created something beautiful, something all her own. The city of Paris had welcomed her with open arms, and now the world was beginning to take notice. She wasn't the girl who had been pushed aside by her family anymore. She was a woman who had created her own destiny, and no one, not even her family, could take that away from her. As the last model walked off the runway, Clara stood there, her heart racing with both exhilaration and a quiet sense of relief. The crowd was on their feet, clapping and cheering, but Clara's focus was elsewhere, on her family. She hadn't expected them to be impressed, let alone moved by what they had just witnessed. And yet, as her gaze swept across the room, she saw something she hadn't anticipated, a moment of realization on their faces. It was fleeting, but it was there. Her mother's eyes were wide, her expression one of awe, as if she was seeing Clara for the first time. Her father, standing beside her, looked uncharacteristically silent, his jaw clenched as he absorbed the scene before him. And then there was Eliza, who was trying to mask the mixture of jealousy and surprise, but Clara could see it in her eyes. The applause died down, but Clara remained rooted in place, the weight of the moment settling over her. She had done it. She had made her mark. It wasn't about the accolades, the praise, or even the recognition from the fashion elite. It was about something deeper, the sense that she had finally proven to herself and to them that she was more than the person they had always underestimated. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she made her way to the front of the stage. As she did, she caught sight of her family again, their faces still filled with a mixture of admiration and regret. The realization was dawning on them. Their daughter, the one they had always dismissed, had just created something extraordinary. And for the first time, Clara could see them struggling to come to terms with their own mistakes. Clara took a deep breath as she reached the microphone, her heart still racing. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, but the weight of her family's gaze felt the heaviest. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she would reclaim her power once and for all. She smiled, and the room fell silent. For the first time in a long while, Clara didn't feel nervous or small. She felt strong, centered, and unapologetically herself. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Clara began, her voice steady and clear. This collection, this show, is more than just about fashion. It's about finding my voice, my purpose, and my strength. For years, I let myself be defined by the expectations of others, but tonight I am here to show you who I am and what I can do when I believe in myself. She paused, her eyes drifting to her family once more. Her mother was looking at her with something akin to admiration, but Clara knew it was too little, too late. She didn't need their validation anymore. For a long time, Clara continued, I let myself be silenced, pushed aside, and overlooked. I allowed myself to be the quiet one, the one who never made waves. But that's not who I am anymore. I am a designer, I am an artist, and I am capable of more than I ever gave myself credit for. Her words hung in the air for a moment, and Clara could see her parents, especially her mother, struggling with the weight of what they had failed to see all these years. Clara could almost feel their regret, but she didn't let it sway her. They hadn't been there for her when she needed them the most, and now, as she stood before them, it was clear that they were beginning to understand the depth of their neglect. Clara wasn't angry anymore, she wasn't upset, she felt liberated. For the first time, she didn't need their approval, their love, or their attention. She had learned to rely on herself, to trust in her own abilities, and that was something her family would never be able to take away from her. As the evening wore on, Clara moved through the crowd, greeting guests, chatting with industry professionals, and basking in the success of the event. Her family remained at the back, watching her from a distance, too proud to approach but too aware of their failure to stay silent. Clara caught her mother's eye again, and this time her mother's gaze softened. There was an apology in her eyes, though unspoken. But Clara didn't need it. She had already forgiven them, if only for her own peace of mind. But forgiveness didn't mean she had to let them back into her life. Clara had carved out a place for herself in the world, and no amount of regret from her family could change that. Later, as the event wrapped up, Clara stepped out into the cool night air, breathing in the freedom that Paris had given her. The city was alive with energy, the streets bustling with people, and Clara felt more at home here than she had ever felt anywhere else. She had come to Paris to escape the suffocating expectations of her family. But now she was beginning to understand that the real escape had been from the person she had allowed herself to be. The timid, invisible daughter who had always lived in someone else's shadow was gone. And in her place stood Clara, the designer, the woman who had built her own success from the ground up. Clara looked up at the Parisian skyline, the city lights twinkling in the distance. She had faced the challenge of her family's rejection, the pain of their neglect, and had come out stronger for it. Tonight, she had shown them, and herself, what she was truly capable of. This was just the beginning. The air was thick with anticipation as Clara walked into the private venue where the after-party for her fashion showcase was being held. The room was filled with guests, designers, influencers, clients, and reporters, but her focus was on one group of people, her family. They had shown up, just as they had at the showcase, but this time, Clara didn't know what to expect. Her parents were standing by the bar, their posture stiff, their eyes darting toward her as she entered. Eliza was nowhere in sight, and Clara couldn't help but feel a slight sense of relief. She wasn't ready to face her sister again, not yet anyway. But the weight of her parents' gaze was more than enough to make her hesitate for a moment before she approached them. As Clara made her way through the crowd, she could see the shame in her father's eyes. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. The once dominant, stern figure who had always placed expectations on Clara was now reduced to someone who was ashamed of his past actions. Her mother, on the other hand, wore a look of mixed pride and guilt, pride in the success of her daughter, but guilt over the years of neglect, the years of taking Clara's presence for granted while doting on Eliza. Clara's heart beat a little faster, not because she was afraid of them, but because this moment was finally here, the moment where they would see her for who she truly was, the moment they would realize the depth of their mistakes. When she reached them, Clara took a moment to look at both her parents. Her mother's face softened when she saw her, but there was still hesitation. "Clara, we just wanted to say how proud we are of you," her mother said, her voice wavering slightly. "We had no idea how much you had been hiding, how much you had inside of you. You've done something incredible here." Clara smiled politely, but her mind was already elsewhere. She had heard these words before, at the showcase, in the texts, in the small, uncertain glances they had exchanged when they saw her success firsthand. But now, standing before them, Clara knew that their words didn't carry the weight they should have. They had been too late. They had let her struggle, let her go unnoticed for far too long. Their pride didn't undo the years of neglect. "I know this must be hard for you to understand," her father spoke next, his voice low. "We didn't mean to push you aside, Clara. I realize now that we made mistakes. I'm sorry for not supporting you the way we should have." Clara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had always longed for these words from him, the apology she had never gotten as a child. But now, as he stood before her, it felt hollow, empty. Their apology wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to make up for the years of feeling like she didn't matter. It wasn't enough to undo the pain they had caused her, the years of silently bending to their will, constantly being compared to Eliza, and constantly being told she wasn't good enough. She had worked hard for this moment, for this success, and hearing their apology felt like they were trying to claim her victory as their own. Clara knew they hadn't truly changed. They weren't sorry for the years of disregard. They were sorry because they had seen her succeed, and now they wanted to be part of it, but she couldn't allow that. Clara took a deep breath, her eyes steady and unwavering. She looked at her parents, saw the regret in their faces, and she knew that it was time. "I don't need you," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "I've spent my whole life trying to prove myself to you, trying to fit into your mold, trying to be the daughter you wanted me to be, but I'm done." Her words hung in the air like a heavy weight. There was no anger in her voice, only finality. She wasn't angry with them anymore. She was beyond that. What she felt now was relief. Clara realized that she didn't need them to be happy, to be successful, to be fulfilled. She had done it on her own, and in doing so, she had learned to stand on her own 2 feet, without their approval, without their expectations. "I've fought my whole life for a seat at the table," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "But I'm done fighting for a place in your world. I've found my own world, and I'm finally free of the weight of your approval." Clara turned to leave, her heart pounding in her chest, but there was no turning back. She didn't look back as she walked away. This wasn't about them anymore, it was about her. As she stepped out into the cool Paris night, Clara finally felt the weight of the years slip off her shoulders. For the first time, she was free. Free from the expectations of her family, free from their love that had always felt conditional. She wasn't a daughter anymore. She was Clara, the woman who had built her own success, and that was more than enough. Clara stepped into the night, her footsteps echoing in the quiet streets of Paris. The weight she had carried for so many years, years of trying to live up to her family's expectations, years of sacrifice, of fighting for validation, was finally gone. She had severed the ties that bound her to a past she no longer needed. The air felt different, lighter, as if the city itself had embraced her new freedom. As she walked through the familiar streets, the twinkling lights of the Eiffel Tower in the distance seemed to remind her of all the possibilities that lay ahead. She had come to Paris to escape her family, but now she realized she was no longer running from them. She was running toward herself. The woman who had spent so long in the shadow of others, the one who had been overlooked and underestimated, had finally stepped into the light. Clara had made the decision to leave behind everything that had kept her confined, the guilt, the disappointment, the constant feeling of not being enough. And with that decision came a sense of peace, a deep, inner calm she had never known before. She no longer needed to prove herself to anyone, least of all her family. She had proven it to herself, and that was all that mattered. The events of the evening, the confrontation with her parents, the words she had spoken, the release of everything she had kept bottled up, had been the final step. There was no more resentment, no more anger. The past had been laid to rest. Clara wasn't angry at her family anymore. She was just done. She had spent so much of her life trying to fit into their mould, trying to be the perfect daughter, the one who always did the right thing, always put others first. But in doing so, she had lost herself. She had allowed herself to become someone else's idea of who she should be. Now, in the quiet of Paris, Clara had found herself again. She was no longer defined by the roles her family had imposed on her. She was Clara, the woman who had fought for her dreams, who had built a career in an industry that had once seemed so out of reach. And more than that, she was someone who had learned to trust herself, to believe in her own strength. As Clara wandered through the streets, a sense of quiet pride settled over her. The applause from the showcase still rang in her ears, but it wasn't the applause she craved. It was the approval she had finally given herself. She had taken control of her life, and in doing so, she had reclaimed her happiness. There were still moments when her thoughts drifted back to her family, to the way they had treated her. She wondered if they truly understood what they had lost, if they realized how much they had taken her for granted. But then Clara smiled softly to herself. She didn't need their understanding anymore. She didn't need their approval. She had found something far more valuable, her own peace. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and for a moment Clara thought about ignoring it. But curiosity got the best of her, and she pulled it out to see a message from her mother. "Clara, I don't know what to say. I wish things had turned out differently. We failed you, but I hope one day you'll come back to us. We love you." Clara paused, her thumb hovering over the screen. Her mother's words were filled with regret, but Clara knew that they couldn't erase the years of neglect. There was no going back. She had given them enough chances, enough room to see her, to understand her. But they had never truly made an effort. They had never valued her in the way she deserved. With a deep breath, Clara put the phone away and looked up at the stars above. She didn't need to reply to her mother's message. She didn't need to keep reopening old wounds. Her family was no longer a part of her story. They were a chapter she had closed, and she was ready to move forward. The city of Paris was alive with energy, the streets bustling with people who, like her, were forging their own paths. Clara was no longer alone in the world. She had found a community of friends, colleagues, and mentors who respected her for who she was, not who they wanted her to be. She had found a place where she belonged. As Clara walked through the streets, her heart light, her mind clear, she knew that her journey was only just beginning. There were still dreams to chase, still challenges to face, but now, for the first time, Clara felt equipped to take them on. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't worried about what others thought of her. She had learned to trust herself, to trust her own voice. For the first time in her life, Clara felt truly free, and that was enough. Clara woke up to the soft glow of morning light filtering through the curtains of her apartment in Paris. It had been a few months since the showcase, and every day had felt like a fresh start. The city was her playground now. Each corner, each street, each cafe offered a new opportunity to explore, to grow, and to find peace in her own skin. There was no longer any pressure to meet the expectations of others. No more trying to prove herself, no more feeling like she was invisible. Clara had finally found her place in the world. The sound of the city outside her window was a constant hum, people bustling, cars passing by, the occasional street musician playing a soft tune. It was different from the noise she had once associated with her family, always loud, always demanding, always suffocating. Here in Paris, Clara had found a balance. The city offered both quiet moments of solitude and the vibrant energy of creativity, and she soaked it all in. Her mornings had become a routine of peaceful reflection. Clara would walk to the local bakery, picking up a fresh croissant or a baguette, and then she would head to the studio. It was a small, bright space where she felt completely at home, surrounded by sketches, fabrics, and the tools of her craft. Here, she was free to create, to experiment, and to express herself without any outside interference. The work came easily now. The inspiration flowed. For the first time, Clara felt like she was truly living her dream. But it wasn't just her career that was thriving. Clara's personal life had blossomed too. She had made friends, real friends, people who saw her for who she was and valued her for it. She had been invited to dinner parties, gallery openings, and even a few intimate gatherings where laughter and conversation flowed easily. These moments of connection, of genuine relationships, were things Clara had never experienced before. In Paris, she wasn't just a daughter or a sister. She was Clara, and that was enough. The quiet evenings spent with friends, sipping wine and discussing art, were a far cry from the tense family dinners she had once endured. No more being compared to Eliza, no more feeling like she was always falling short, no more constantly trying to live up to their standards, to seek their approval. In Paris, Clara was allowed to just be, and with each passing day, she felt a deeper sense of peace. She could feel the transformation happening within her. The insecure, anxious girl who had once sought validation from her family was slowly fading away. In her place stood a woman who was confident in her own abilities, who didn't need anyone's approval to feel worthy. Clara had learned that her worth wasn't defined by the people around her. It came from within. The work she had done, the decisions she had made, those were her choices. Clara wasn't a victim of her circumstances anymore. She had taken control of her life, and that was the greatest achievement of all. The strength she had once looked for outside herself had always been inside her. Now she felt the full force of that strength. One afternoon, as Clara walked through the streets of Paris, heading to a small cafe she often visited, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had always dreamed of living here, of being a part of the city's creative heartbeat, and now she was. But more than that, she had found a sense of self that she had never known. The world was hers to explore, and she no longer felt held back by the past. As she sipped her coffee at the cafe, Clara reflected on the journey she had taken to get to this point. There had been so many moments of doubt, so many times she had wondered if she had made the right decision in leaving her family behind. But now, sitting in that cafe, watching the world go by, she knew without a doubt that she had made the right choice. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. Clara had learned to let go of the idea that family, or anyone for that matter, had the power to define her. She had come to understand that her happiness was not tied to their approval, their love, or their expectations. She was her own person, and that was something she could never give up. The realization brought a sense of warmth, a quiet joy that filled her chest. She had done it. She had built a life for herself, and it was everything she had ever dreamed of and more. She wasn't the girl who had been ignored, dismissed, or overshadowed. She was Clara, the woman who had fought for her place in the world, and now she was finally free. With a soft smile on her face, Clara finished her coffee and stood up, ready to face whatever came next. There was no uncertainty, no fear, only excitement for the future and everything it held. In Paris, Clara had found her home, not just in the city, but in herself. And for the first time in her life, she knew that she was enough. Clara sat in her studio late one evening, the soft hum of the city just outside her window. The studio was her sanctuary now, a place of creation, of solitude, of reflection. The walls were lined with fabric swatches, sketches of new designs, and framed photographs of some of her proudest moments. This space had become her world, and every corner of it reflected who she had become, a woman of strength, independence, and vision. It had been over a year since she left her family behind, and with each passing day, Clara felt more grounded in the life she had built for herself. The success of her fashion line had grown exponentially. Her work was now showcased in major boutiques, and she had secured collaborations with designers and brands that she had once only dreamed of. Clara's name was becoming synonymous with innovation and elegance in the fashion industry, and she was proud of every step that had led her here. But it wasn't just the career milestones that filled Clara with pride, it was the knowledge that she had done it all on her own. There was no family waiting for her approval, no expectations weighing her down. Every success was hers, and that sense of ownership over her life was a feeling she had never known before. Clara's phone buzzed with a message, interrupting her thoughts. It was from Lucy, her close friend and fellow designer. "There's a gala next month. I'd love for you to be the guest of honour. It's time for the world to see who Clara Rayner really is." Clara smiled to herself. Lucy had always believed in her, and that meant more to her than words could express. She had found a family in Paris, not one of blood, but one of choice. Her colleagues, friends, and mentors were people who saw her for who she truly was. They respected her, supported her, and most importantly, they encouraged her to be unapologetically herself. Clara had discovered that true family wasn't defined by shared genetics, but by the people who stood by you, who uplifted you, and who never tried to hold you back. As she prepared for the gala, Clara couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought her here. There had been times of loneliness, of doubt, but those moments had only strengthened her resolve. The decision to leave her family, to carve her own path, had been the hardest thing she had ever done, but it had also been the most important. In doing so, Clara had learned that the power to define her life, her worth, and her happiness was hers and hers alone. The night of the gala arrived, and Clara found herself in a stunning gown, standing on the red carpet. The event was filled with fashion icons, celebrities, and some of the industry's most influential figures. Clara felt a sense of exhilaration, not from the applause or the glitz, but from the fact that she had reached this point on her own terms. She wasn't the daughter of anyone. She wasn't the sister who had been overlooked. She was Clara Rayner, a name now recognised in the world of fashion. As she mingled with guests, Clara couldn't help but notice how different this world felt from the one she had left behind. There was no judgment here, no expectations, just admiration for her work and her journey. For once, Clara wasn't trying to fit into someone else's mould. She was being celebrated for who she was, her talent, her vision, her resilience. At the end of the night, as Clara stood on the stage to give her speech, she felt a profound sense of peace. The room was full of industry leaders, journalists, and her friends, and all eyes were on her. She had worked so hard to get here, and now, for the first time in her life, she felt that everything she had done was worthwhile. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Clara began, her voice calm but strong. "This is not just a celebration of my work, but of the journey I've been on, a journey of finding my true self, of discovering that the only approval I need is my own. I've spent so many years trying to fit into a world that never saw my worth. But now I stand here, knowing that I have created my own path, and I am proud of the woman I've become." She paused, looking out at the crowd. For a moment her thoughts drifted back to her family, the hurt, the disappointment, the years of longing for their approval. But as quickly as those memories surfaced, they were gone. Clara had moved on. She had forgiven them, not because they deserved it, but because she deserved peace. The past no longer held any power over her. Clara smiled as she continued. "I stand here not because of what others have given me, but because I've earned it. Every challenge, every setback, every moment of doubt has only made me stronger. And tonight, I celebrate not just my success, but the freedom I've found in being true to myself." As the applause echoed through the room, Clara felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had done it. She had won. not just against her family, but against the person she had been before. The girl who had been overlooked, neglected, and told she wasn't enough. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had found her voice, who had taken control of her destiny, and who had finally learned to believe in herself. Clara's journey wasn't just about career success. It was about the freedom she had found in being unapologetically herself. And now, standing on the stage, surrounded by the success she had created, Clara knew one thing for sure. She was free. Free from the past, free from the opinions of others, and free to live her life on her own terms. Her journey had been long and difficult, but in the end, Clara had won. And she was ready for whatever came next.